Доктору професору Вітису Валатці. Схоластична теорія справедливої війни та її актуальність сьогодні. Факультет креативних індустрій, Вільнюський технологічний університет.
Okay, so I will try to share the slides. The slides are here. Can you see the slides?
Yes, sure.
So, the philosophy of international law of modern scholasticism, the theory of just war. This presentation was prepared with our Dean of the Faculty, Professor Vytis. So, the Helsinki Final Act defined the essential principles of international law, ensuring the basic rights of states and the patterns of their mutual relations. This act includes sovereign equality and respect for the rights inherent in sovereignty, refraining from the threat or use of force, inviolability of frontiers, territorial integrity of states, peaceful settlement of disputes, non-intervention in the internal affairs, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief, equal rights and self-determination of peoples, cooperation among states, fulfillment in good faith of obligations of international law. To a citizen of the Western world, the aforementioned principles seemed self-evident postulates, valid always and everywhere. Well, at least always in Europe, which is generally considered the cradle of civilization, tolerance, democracy, and the rule of law. However, the social, legal, and political reality rejects this vision, as the above-mentioned principles have been waiting for their recognitions for quite a long time. And it's as well nowadays that numerous violations of international law's principles are still taking place in Europe, and one of the most representative examples are the various offensive aggressions implemented by Russia. But let us turn back to the history, namely to the history of the basic rights of states and nations. And one of the most significant factors that contributed to the establishing these principles was the philosophy of international law that raised and substantiated them. The originator of this theory is considered to be Hugo Grotius. However, quite often the predecessors of this Renaissance thinker are undeservedly forgotten, namely the authors of the second or modern scholasticism, which lasted from the 16th to the 18th centuries. Both thinkers are the Dominican friar Francisco de Vitoria and the Jesuit Francisco Suarez. You can see some kind of pictures of them, portraits, Francisco de Vitoria and Francisco Suarez. So, one of the most significant parts of that theory was the list of fundamental rights of nations and states. This list includes the right to existence, the right to mutual equality and political independence, the right of international migration and trade, as well as the right and duty of humanitarian or even military aid. On the other hand, the representatives of the second scholasticism had to recognize that the above-mentioned rights were violated from time to time by various states, nations, or even individuals. According to the authors of modern scholasticism, violations of that time should be regarded as extremely serious international crimes. They undermine the international peace and security and cause a great harm to nations and states. This harm involves the seizure or looting of territories, loss of political independence, and so on. In such a situation, two essential measures can be taken to restore the status quo and compensate for the damage caused, namely negotiations should be attempted first. And if and only if all means of peaceful persuasion fail, just war, or in Latin bellum justum, is permitted against a nation or state that has violated international law. This principle entirely corresponds to the so-called rule of the last resort included in the contemporary international law. Within frames of modern scholasticism, the principles of just war were most developed by Francisco Suarez. According to him, war is neither bad in itself nor forbidden to Christians. It can be both just and unjust. A just war is obliged to fulfill a number of necessary conditions. The list begins with reasons and factors which justify war. In modern international law, the set of such causes and factors that explain when it is permissible to wage war is called the jus ad bellum, right to warfare. And, well, what are the principles of this right to warfare? Firstly, the war should be declared and waged by the legitimate authority. That is, only the legitimate ruler of state or nation can declare war against another state or nation. True, this rule applies only to offensive war. As in the case of external aggression, both the entire civil society and its individual members are absolutely permitted to start a defensive war without any sanction of the political sovereign. Secondly, just war requires a just cause. Such a cause was also interpreted in a very modern way. Namely, it was argued that diversity of religion is not the cause of a just war. The reason is that every human being possesses free will delivered by God himself. Therefore, every human being is absolutely free to choose the way to confess and praise to God. Similarly, the ruler's desire to expand the territory of state or to earn the glory of a warlord cannot be considered the just cause of war. It's only the significant damage done by a certain state or nation to another state or nation that is regarded as a just cause of the war. This damage includes the capture or robbery of state's territory, the loss of political independence, the misappropriation of state and private property, the obstruction or restraint of trade with foreign countries, even that, and so on. As well, an external aggression against which every nation and state has the right and duty to defend itself also counts as a cause for just warfare. Finally, a just cause of war is also the aggression against another nation or state, in which case the other nations and states have the right and duty to give the aid to the victim of aggression in defending its territory and independence. In the contemporary international law, such an aid is called the humanitarian intervention. External aggression is sufficient cause to start a defensive war. Meanwhile, while declaring the offensive war, sorry, I just I lost yes. Before declaring an offensive war, the sovereign, based on his reason and conscience, must thoroughly investigate if there is the just cause of this just war. Yeah. If it turns out that the enemy is rather right than wrong, for example, it must be admitted that the city that the sovereign wants to regain once belonged to the enemy's predecessor, from which it was later deprived of by one of the sovereign's predecessors, the offensive war is not permitted. In contemporary international law, such an examination of just cause of offensive war is called the comparative justice. Thus, a just war is impossible without the just reason or just cause. Even in case the latter exists, the sovereign must objectively evaluate his chances for victory before starting an offensive warfare. If it turns out that there is a greater probability of losing a war than winning it, the sovereign must refrain from warfare. Otherwise, his state is at risk of suffering even greater damage than the existing one. Within the frames of a contemporary international law, such an assessment of one's chances to win a war is called the principle of probability of success. So, the just war requires just cause and legitimate authority as its source. But what about the just warfare itself? According to the authors of modern scholasticism, the certain principles should be followed while waging war. In contemporary international law, a set of those principles is called jus in bello, or the law of warfare, or the international humanitarian law. After Suarez and De Vitoria, the main principle of just warfare is moderation or proportionality. More to say, all the rules of just warfare directly derives from the above-mentioned principle. The main message of proportionality is that armed force used in war must be precisely consistent with the objective of a just war, namely repairing the damage done. Therefore, measures that go beyond this goal, for example, capture or robbery of adversary's territory, mass killing of inhabitants of this territory, etc., are strictly prohibited, as they aim not at fair and proportionate compensation for damages, but at vengeance, elementary material gain, strengthening the power of a state, etc. By the way, moderation is as well necessary before starting the hostilities. Namely, just before launching an offensive war, the sovereign must warn the adversary country of possible hostilities, giving at the same time the last offer to compensate for the damage caused. And if the adverse country offers such a compensation, the ruler must accept it and refrain from hostilities. On the other hand, while waging war, it is allowed to inflict on the adversary all the losses and damages necessary for the victory. For example, it is permitted to assault cities, to blow up bridges, to demolish fortresses, to take captives, to expropriate enemies' weapons, ships, and various war machines. Yet, moderation must be maintained in every step you take. It is not allowed to devastate opponents' agriculture, to rape women, to kill captives and hostages, and so on. And the most importantly, it should be done everything possible to minimize the harm being inflicted on peaceful population, the innocents, as Suarez entitles them, or using modern terminology, non-combatants. They include children, women, ambassadors, clergymen, and anyone who cannot take up a weapon. In warfare, deliberate and predetermined killing of innocent people is strictly prohibited. Still, if victory cannot be achieved without accidental deaths of a smaller or greater number of innocents, the killing is allowed. For example, while assaulting the town or exploding a bridge, it's impossible to protect all peaceful people. Yet intentional killing or mutilation of innocents during such campaigns is a hard crime and also mortal sin, instantly turning a just war into the unjust one. And within frames of contemporary international law, the requirement to distinguish combatants from the non-combatants, as well as prohibiting international killing or mutilation of the latter, is called the principle of discrimination or separation. So, while waging a just war, it is necessary not to deviate from proportionality. And what about a post-war situation? Namely, what should be done when the war is already won and the winner strives to restore justice? Again, Suarez's answer sounds very modern. According to him, also in this case, proportionality remains the main principle. So it doesn't like this, that the winner takes it all. No. The winner also should follow the principle of proportionality. Namely, the winner should inflict punishments and reparations on the adversary that are consistent with, but in no case exceeding, the damage made by adversary. This damage includes all the losses that the winner's country suffered from the adversary both before and during the war. Namely, citizens killed, cities burnt and destroyed, and so on. On the other hand, according to requirements of justice and proportionality, even the death penalty may be imposed on those belonging to the adversary's camp who have inflicted the exceptional harm. And I will go to conclusions. The principles of just war presented by the authors of modern scholasticism were delivered and developed in the period starting from the 16th century and ending with 18th century. Still, the majority of those principles are also relevant in contemporary global world, where war is an inseparable element of everyday reality. Those principles embrace just cause of war, legitimate authority as the source of just offensive war, comparative justice, probability of success, illegality of religious wars, observing moderation and proportionality while waging war, adversaries' preliminary warning of intended offensive actions, the inviolability of ambassadors and the other peaceful population, prohibition of killing prisoners of war and hostages, the compliance of reparations with the damage caused before and during the war. More to say, nowadays, when several military conflicts between various states take place at the same time all over the world, the theory of just war is more relevant than ever. The relevance of this theory was further enhanced by the brutal offensive war of Russia against Ukraine, which basically violated all the principles and rules of modern international law, enshrined in such the documents of international law as Declaration of Principles of International Law and Helsinki Final Act. So, waging we just war, just разом до перемоги. Thank you.
Дякую, дякую. Thank you, Vytis. I was skeptical of scholastics before presentation, Vytis, and now I'm changing my point of view about it. Unfortunately, the racists know nothing about the opinion of the scholastic. Thank you, дякую, дякую.